Hey everyone, so some of the most frequent videos on this channel are ones where I discuss and analyze Gintama characters. A lot of times these videos have a basis in pre-existing information, but something that I've always had a huge interest in is alternate history. The possible course of events and implications if some major things went differently. This is very fascinating in the discussion of real-world history, but just as interesting in the world of fiction, especially fiction that has a good amount of backstory, world building, and a large cast of characters. As most of you know, Gintama has one of my favorite fictional worlds out there, and I felt like taking a step back and speculating on some theories for what could have happened if some major events didn't happen. This video will be partly me speculating and making guesswork, and partly to spark a potential discussion, so feel free to comment and let me know your thoughts. Number 1. What if Jiraia was still in Yoshiwara when Housen attacked? I find this one particularly interesting because Housen arrived shortly after Jiraia faked his death and started a fire in Yoshiwara. We know that Tsukuyo and Hinoa couldn't oppose him right away and had to build support against him in the long term to try and overthrow him. The Yorozuya was the final piece they needed to successfully oust Housen, but what if Housen showed up just a bit earlier while Jiraia was still around? Not only does this create an interesting Jiraia vs Housen what if battle, but it's interesting to think how Jiraiya's long-term plans for Tsukuyo may have been altered if he had to take on Housen. I see two ways this could have went down. Jiraia could potentially see Housen's invasion as an opportunity to strengthen Tsukuyo's resolve, or Housen could just be a nuisance to Jiraiya's plan and he'll have to put his plans on hold just to take out Housen, alongside Tsukuyo and the Hyaka. This could have been possible since Jiraia was seemingly of comparable strength to Gintoki, and Tsukuyo was pretty skilled on her own, and the Hyaka could provide good support. Something that would surely play in their favor is the Hyaka have no reason to defect to Housen if they have a strong duo in Tsukuyo and Jiraia on their side. So there isn't as much of a fear factor, so Housen could potentially be pushed back even more soundly than in the regular timeline with Tsukuyo, Gintoki, and the 48 other Hyaka. Since we're talking about Tsukuyo, Jiraia, and the entire Hyaka, I don't see Housen standing a chance, and as is clear with our timeline, it seems Housen went in and took over alone, since he didn't take any Harusame soldiers with him to Yoshiwara. So I don't think Housen would stand a chance if the scenario plays out like this. One potential problem with this that I see is that if Housen is defeated but not killed, would he be able to bring the Harusame for a second attack? Unfortunately, it's unclear what his standing was amongst the 7th Division at the exact point he decides to leave, but judging by how negatively Kamui and Abuto viewed him for trying to leave to Earth, it's likely he left against their desires, and it would be unlikely for him to rally them to join him on an attack on Yoshiwara, and he probably couldn't even scare them into it, since Kamui and Abuto would have been there. Although they were probably a little bit younger and not as strong, since Housen went to Yoshiwara as a sort of retirement, it can't have been that long ago before the beginning of the Gintama story, so Kamui and Abuto were probably still of considerable enough strength to oppose him if he tried to scare them into rejoining him. So with Housen defeated, Kamui and Abuto and the rest of the Harusame would have no reason to go to Yoshiwara, since their person of interest would have been neutralized, and Housen's actions would probably have been disassociated from the Harusame anyway. Now, that is how I think it would play out if Jiraia stayed in Yoshiwara. But what I feel like would have been more likely, unfortunately, is he would probably use Housen's attack to execute his plan to fake his death. He could potentially pretend to be killed by Housen or just disappear right when Housen arrives, therefore setting our timeline into motion. The scenario hinges on the alternate reality of Jiraia not starting a fire and faking his own death, since that took place a few years before the story started, but that doesn't mean his personality would necessarily change. Maybe in this alternate timeline, the plan to start a fire could have failed, or he set it aside for a different plan, or just postponed it for a later time. Basically, he would still have the desire to abandon Tsukuyo so she ends up not relying on anyone, but Housen's arrival would probably force him to act on it. Unfortunately, there's no real way of knowing since Housen and Jiraia never even interacted or saw each other, so it's possible that the former theory could have happened, and he may not have seen Housen as an opportunity, but as an interruption to his grand scheme. Some other implications of the former are that Kagura never fights with Abuto and discovers the Berserk state, or rather, she discovers the Berserk state at a different point in the story. This also means that Tsukuyo doesn't meet the Yorozuya, which itself has several implications, meaning that Jiraia has no reason to return, and the Yorozuya are never contracted to avenge Suzerain, which set off the chain of events that got Sarasara arrested, and Tsukuyo and the Yorozuya might never meet all the way until the Silver Soul arc, if the Altano Liberation Army even still invades with all these changes. Number 2. What if ShigeShige didn't die? So this one brings us to ShigeShige's assassination in exile in Kyo. So ShigeShige had rallied the Shinsengumi and his followers to start a rebellion against Nobunobu's Bakufu shortly before his death. But what if the assassin failed somehow? The first major implication is that Nobunobu would not have had his major face turn that we've seen in Silver Soul, since he wouldn't have the guilt of killing ShigeShige nor the fallout of events that resulted from his death, including his realization that he was being puppeteered and manipulated by the Tendosho. Then there would be less of a reason for Katsura to attempt to assassinate Nobunobu at Club Smile, and he wouldn't get arrested and sent to Kokujo Island, meaning that Gintoki and Ko's fated meeting with Utsuro would be put on hold for a while. And Isaburo wouldn't die on Kokujo Island as he did in our timeline, and the civil war between Nobunobu and ShigeShige would continue. The Shinsengumi wouldn't need to go into hiding, and also since the chain of events that sent the Yorozuya into hiding wouldn't have taken place, and they may not have met Utsuro yet, there isn't a need to go to Rakio to confront him. And that also means Oboro wouldn't hasten to his death by fighting Takasugi, although this could have still taken place on Earth, since the events of the Shogun assassination arc all still happen in this timeline, save for the actual assassination at the end. So many major events were set in motion due to ShigeShige's sudden assassination, and if it didn't happen, many characters would still be around and the story would look very different. And on a side note, it's possible Shirei could have survived and we could have actually seen what he was capable of. And last but not least, number 3, what if Gintoki chose Takasugi and Katsura instead of Shoyo? Now this one I believe is the most interesting. The forced execution of Shoyo created the basis of so many of the series' main narrative issues. The Kiheitai running rampant, the rise of Utsuro, continued Joey resistance, and to an extent, the solidification of the Tendosho's control of Japan and the world. We do know that Gintoki was given a choice to kill Shoyo and spare the life of himself, Takasugi and Katsura, or kill Takasugi and Katsura. I've always wondered how exactly events would have panned out if Gintoki chose the latter. The series itself would not exist anywhere near its current form, and there would be no Takasugi to run the Kiheitai and serve as a main antagonist to Gintoki, and there would be a lot less continued resistance against the Tendosho and Bakufu, since Katsura's Joey were the ones making up a bulk of the remaining resistance. Without Katsura to lead the Joey Shishi, the resistance would be paltry at best, and without Takasugi, the Kiheitai would never be revived in their extremist form, and major events like the Shinsengumi Crisis and the battle between Nobunobu and ShigeShige's forces wouldn't have taken place at Iga. The Shinsengumi would still exist, but they would have nobody to join up with if the Hitotsubashi pushed the Tokugawa out like in our timeline. The next major factor is the effect that this would have on Gintoki himself. How would Shoyo react to Gintoki choosing to kill the other students, since Shoyo's reaction upon his execution clearly indicated that killing him was the choice that he wanted Gintoki to make? It's fairly safe to assume that Shoyo would have hated Gintoki for making that decision. Being essentially isolated from Shoyo after this, I feel like Gintoki would be a much different person. He killed his two closest comrades and best friends, and therefore his beloved teacher is out of his life. He would probably still go into isolation like he did in our timeline, but I speculate Gintoki would be even more unreceptive to others. Indifferent, a complete shell of his former self. In our timeline, he became colder and needed a lot of time to reacquaint himself with the world around him and rediscover close bonds. But in this alternate timeline, that isn't even an option. There would be nothing left for Gintoki to look forward to, and nobody to save her. In our timeline, he made a horrifying choice, but one that saved more people in the long run, and gave Japan a fighting chance to resist the Tendosho. In this alternate timeline, Gintoki killed not only his comrades, but Japan's own hope of survival, and this would be made all the worse if Shoyo transforms back into Utsuro, which is very possible. Not to mention, he would probably have to fight Utsuro alone, if he can even will himself to do so, because Gintoki choosing to kill Katsura and Takasugi would imply he felt as strongly about Shoyo as Oboro did, which would mean that Gintoki would not be able to will himself to fight him. Even if he did manage to fight Utsuro, a colder, much more cynical and distant Gintoki would likely never befriend Shinpachi and Kagura, Ote, Otose, and Tama. And Gintoki was the rallying point in which all these characters got to know each other. So it's very possible that the Yorozuya would not exist in any capacity. Kagura would still be roaming around Edo looking for legitimate employment, Shinpachi would be toiling away at his restaurant job, and Otose would never meet Tama. These characters may have never crossed paths if it wasn't for Gintoki, so it's unlikely that they would form the strong group that they have in our timeline, and without the Yorozuya, who knows if Kagura can ever stop Kamui, who knows if Shinpachi would be able to defeat Obi Hajime, if Otai would ever escape the Yagyu household. Every one of these events could have gone very differently without the combined efforts of the Yorozuya and the allies they made along the way. Gintoki choosing the other option in this scenario would simply render Gintama nearly unrecognizable from what we know it as today, and trying to go over the major changes probably merits its own video. Alright, so those are my theories. Let me know what you guys think, or if you have any interesting theories of your own. Do you agree or disagree with the ones I brought to the table? Anyway, thank you so much for watching and for the support. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.